Hi, this is Claire, and this is my response to the question, how has race impacted my life? Well, first things first, I'm mixed race, Mexican father and Anglo mother, and I look pretty much like a white girl. I think those simple facts will largely shape the rest of what I have to say. First, I don't feel like race has been a major issue in my life. The bulk of this little essay will address why my felt experience is inaccurate. I don't think I've personally been discriminated against for having a Hispanic last name. The major racial impacts of being a Villarreal have been that I was eligible for the Hispanic equivalent of the National Merit Award, and telemarketers sometimes call up and speak Spanish to me. Beyond my personal experiences, it seems to me that we, as an increasingly diverse nation, have finally recognized that we can no longer afford to discriminate against minorities, whether racial, ethnic, religious, or whatever. It's not politically correct to do anything but tiptoe around race and discrimination, and only uncouth people would admit in the public sphere to having racial prejudices. Laws have been passed to ensure that everyone starts out on a level playing field, and we as a nation continue to legislate equality. And yet, I would argue all this political correctness means that a lot of inequality and a lot of very real discrimination gets swept under the collective rug. I know people who would never use racial epithets, but they're uncomfortable around people from groups they've only known as the other. Most of us, whatever racial or ethnic group we're from, will probably find some prejudices about someone if we look deeply and honestly inside. Part of what makes it so difficult to root out our own deep-seated prejudices is that if we're able, we structure our lives so that we stay inside our own comfort zones, rarely venturing into the social worlds that abut our accustomed sphere on all sides. Until you've been the other, it's easy to say that we have a free, fair society. My mother told me a story once, set in the almost all-white high school where she taught, and where I went to school. Yes, I was what passed for diversity there. A white student was complaining that members of minorities had more rights and privileges than white students, that reverse discrimination was now the real problem. Really, my mother said? Do you think you'd be better off African American then? The student thought about it for a moment, then admitted, no. The unfortunate truth behind all our legal and superficial display of equality is that institutional inequality is alive and well. Schools have been desegregated, but what does that word mean when many neighborhoods are de facto desegregated and high school dropout rates are profoundly unequal? What do civil rights mean when black men are still incarcerated at multiple times the rate of Caucasian men? What do voting rights mean when districts are gerrymandered so that blocks of minority voters are split into adjacent districts, thus remaining minorities, instead of being able to carry a district and have a representative of their own? What does the right to higher education mean when minority students come out of elementary school already behind and have to put in heroic efforts if they're to catch up by high school? What does the right to equal housing mean when the gap between median African American income and white income is steadily growing? This word white brings me to the level of fundamental linguistic discrimination. The language many people use to discuss race implies that there is a dominant white culture, the majority, and then there are non-white minority groups. That's an outdated model of our social reality. First of all, white has almost been equated with standard American, as though that group were by definition the identity of the nation. That in and of itself points to deeply internalized racism. The truth is that white Americans are just one more group who consider their social reality normative, but they happen to have controlled the larger social structures for so long that they still have a great advantage in shaping the image of mainstream American culture. If having a woman anchor on a major network show was a risk, imagine an African American of either gender. Shocking! Our talking heads must be pale-skinned. Finally, I'd like to put linguistics and sociology together for a moment. People seem to forget that there's no such thing as white, just as there's no such thing as black. There are European Americans who can be further subdivided into Irish American, Italian American, etc., and who usually faced discrimination themselves as they arrived in large immigrant waves. There are Hispanic Americans who are sometimes as pale-skinned as the Anglos. On the black side, there are people whose ancestors came to this country from Africa as slaves. There are first-generation immigrants from Africa. There are people from the Caribbean and South American countries. And of course, there are an increasing number of us mixed-race Americans, folks like me who never quite know which box captures my essence when I fill out the important forms in life. I look white, but I like menudo. what to do. How has race impacted my life? It's been foundational in shaping the way I see the world. It's played a role in where I've lived, where I went to school, my life goals, the religious institutions I've attended. How many black Buddhists do you know? The music I listen to, the cultural narratives I accept as normative. The fact that I hardly ever think about race doesn't mean it hasn't touched me. It means I'm white.